Hello, today we are going to be talking about an issue in health ethics. But before we start, how can we define ethics? The art and discipline of standards of conduct that guide decisions and actions based on duties derived from core values. For today, we are specifically going to look at the issue of adolescent access to sexual health education and services using the STAR decision-making model. S stands for STOP, where we take the time to recognize the ethical problem and identify all of the issues surrounding and contributing to the problem. Then we can develop possible solutions for the dilemma at hand. T stands for test, where we use the following strategies to determine which ethical approach we want to take for the issue. These tests include the harm test, the legality test, the precedent test, the respect test, the golden rule test, and the peer or colleague test. A stands for act, where we make a final decision. Once tests are done and all the considered from multiple viewpoints, we act upon our decision. Lastly, R stands for reflect, where we consider the outcome, take responsibility, and adapt for the future. Here we can determine if we consider all the possible consequences and make plans to move forward. Now we will apply the STAR model to our issue of adolescent access to sexual health education and services. This is a controversy between public health and parents where we see politically driven and religiously driven agendas. The stakeholders involved in this problem include teachers, parents, students, and policymakers. The ethical dilemma here surrounds who has the authority to teach sexual education to adolescents, if any at all. Seeing as there are many different approaches to beliefs, parents may not always agree with the sexual education provided in schools. Looking at these issues, we developed 3 solutions to the problem. Leave it as the parent's responsibility to teach the children, implement sexual education in high schools, or have a mandatory general education requirement of sexual health in college. First, we use the harm test, where we ask, does this option do less harm than the alternatives? There are parents who do not want their children to be taught sex education in schools, in the belief that the school system should not have a role in divulging such sensitive information to children who are, in their eyes, too young for the subject matter. When considering the harm test, in theory, receiving comprehensive sex education from a trusted adult would be beneficial. However, oftentimes parents themselves are not educated on all matters included in comprehensive sexual education: contraceptives, consent, sexual assault, and LGBT inclusivity. Many parents find that talking with their children about sexuality and reproduction can be overwhelming and awkward. Additionally, there is no evidence showing that this method functions at a community level of public health. A 2012 study by Chen et al. Found that strong evidence suggests that approaches to sex education that include information about both contraception and abstinence help young people to delay sex and also to have healthy relationships and avoid STDs and unintended pregnancies when they do become sexually active. Many of these programs have resulted in delayed sexual debut, resulted frequency of sex in a number of sexual partners, increased condom or contraceptive use, or reduced sexual risk-taking. Then we use the precedent test, where we ask, does this option set a precedent which, while the outcome in this fact pattern may not be problematic, would create a dramatically different outcome in another fact pattern? Since there is no current federal legislation about this concern, each state has different requirements of their sexual education courses. As you can see on this graph, only 23 states are mandated to provide sexual education, and of those, only 13 states in the nation require sex education to be medically accurate. As there are states with comprehensive sexual education courses in public schools, it is clear that this alone would not set a precedent. Thus, by creating the requirement for a class on human sexual behavior at the collegiate level, a new precedent can be set with other colleges to follow. Lastly, we use the golden rule test, where we ask, would I still think the choice of this option would be good if I were one of those adversely affected by it? How would I want to be treated? For this stage, we try to imagine treatment from the viewpoint of each stakeholder. As a parent, many typically want education for their children, but want it to be in line with their own beliefs and values. However, as we have mentioned before, this is not always in the best interest of improving public health. As a teacher, many typically teach values that are in line with both the schools and the parents of the community, which represents similar issues to the previous argument in terms of addressing public health. As a policymaker, one would look at state or federal regulations on the issue, which we have shown are quite diverse and not always set up to benefit public health. As a student receiving the education, many want to receive the most well-rounded and factually correct form of education to ensure that they can understand their choices and risk in sexual behavior. After considering all the information from our stop and test steps, we decided that the best solution for our action stage was to require sexual education in college. For our reasoning, we discussed how these students are no longer minors and how STD rates typically rise in college. By making sexual education a general education requirement in college, there's likely to be less pushback from parents because their children are legal adults and typically more independent. Additionally, this education in college would target the high rates of STDs in college students. Lastly, we noted that a college campus is typically more diverse and more likely to be inclusive than high school or parental education, which would call for a more well-rounded education than our other options. After making a decision, we will now reflect on the outcome and future plans of our decision. In terms of adapting for the future, the college or university would have to assume the responsibility for accommodating all students into the class, which may present as a challenge in terms of available space and professors. However, we determined that for overall benefits, having sexual education in college would help decrease STD rates, as well as avoid any legal issues or pushback from parents in regard to teaching this to minors. Now that you have seen how the STAR model works, you can use it in your own ethical decisions. Just remember the acronym: STOP, TEST, ACTION, and REFLECT. Thank you so much for watching.